talking just a little bit about where we were starting with fibrous connective tissue. So we learned the epithelial tissues, what they looked like, how to identify them. Then the next thing that we were working on is connective tissue. And we've got different types of connective tissue. And we've got dense connective tissue and we have loose connective tissue. And then we have reticular connective tissue. The first one that we're going to talk about is loose connective tissue. This is mainly what we kind of started talking about. It's kind of this, it's more about the matrix when it comes to the loose connective tissue. And remember, the matrix is the ground substance, which is kind of the liquidy, or if it's bone, it can be hard, but just the media that it sits in, whatever it is that it sits in, along with all kinds of fibers. And there can be collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. And remember that the collagen fibers are strong but flexible. The elastin fibers are super stretchy. And then the reticular fibers are very structured. They're more strong, not very flexible. Okay? So loose connective tissue is going to be just this matrix of all of those things. And then there's cells situated in the tissue. So connective tissue kind of breaks our rule. Remember in 10th grade biology, I taught us that we had those levels of organization. You have one cell, and then once you have a whole bunch of the same cells doing the same thing, it's a tissue. And a whole bunch of tissues working together makes an organ. Well, I'm kind of breaking that rule a little bit here because this is a tissue, but it has lots of different cells in it. It has some of them have white blood cells in them. Some of them have fibroblasts, which we'll learn are cells that make the fibers and the matrix. Then you've got mast cells, which we'll learn about later. So we've got all of these different cells that are in there. And then there's all this extracellular outside the cell, all this stuff outside the cell too. So that's what makes connective tissue a little bit different. So while we looked at the shape of the cells for epithelia, and epithelia, a couple of unique characteristics of epithelia, just to review, since it's been a long weekend. I'm doing a lot of review, sorry. But the epithelia always has an apical side, which has a surface side, and then it has the basement membrane where it attaches. And then we organize them by whether they're one layer or many layers, simple or stratified. And then squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Okay? Now we're moving into connective tissue, and we're going to talk a lot about the fibers and what it looks like. So for loose connective tissue. So loose connective tissue, we've got two kinds. We have areolar and adipose. So two types of loose connective tissue, areolar and adipose. Here we've got our areolar and our adipose. So these commonly lie between other tissues. So this is kind of separating two layers of tissues, or it's between organs. We've got a lot of organs just situated all together in our belly. And there's like a nice little sack of connective tissue, for lack of better definition, coddling all of those organs and separating them from each other. And that's what this loose connective tissue does. All right, so the areolar loose connective tissue, this is where we're going to have kind of a fine spider web kind of appearance. And the cells of this tissue are mainly fibroblasts. So you're going to find a lot of cells in this one. And the cells that you're going to find are mainly fibroblasts. These fibroblasts, do you guys remember? Fibro we haven't had yet, but you can imagine what it means. Fiber. And then we learned blast as one of our word parts. Do you remember it? A developing cell. So what a fibroblast is it's a cell that makes the matrix, makes the fibers. It's developing this matrix, developing the fibers. So they're large, star-shaped cells that produce extracellular fibers. They're making all these fibers outside the cells. And these fibers are helping to connect things together, coddle them, kind of like swaddle them. That's the word that I was trying to think of. You know how these moms have the, what are those called where you wrap the swaddle blanket? Thank you. Have you ever seen those swaddle blankets? The loose connective tissue is a little bit like that with our internal organs. Imagine that we kind of have this swaddle blanket around all of our organs, holding them together, keeping them apart from each other. That's kind of like the areola tissue. So the fibroblasts make collagen and elastin fibers. So they're making fibers. And here's our loose connective tissue. You've got different kinds of fibers. Some of them are thinner. These would be probably the elastic fibers. These thicker ones would be the collagen fibers. And then you can see the cells in here, fibroblasts. They're making all of these fibers and then the ground substance. So it's very loose, kind of a hodgepodge of stuff in there. Then we've got adipose. So you've got this loose connective tissue, and then you have another form of loose connective tissue, basically fat, the adipose tissue. So the fibroblasts are the parts that we see. They get really big and they store fat. And because they get so big and take up so much space, there's very little matrix, not much matrix to the adipose tissue. And we need this adipose tissue for cushioning for our organs, including your eyes and your kidneys. And obviously we store energy with adipose cells too. So here's an example of what the adipose cells would look like. And you can see, it's hard to tell on this, but they're trying to point out that here's a nucleus, here's a nucleus, here's a nucleus, here's a nucleus. So these cells have a nucleus. They're just so full of this fatty acid liquid that it squishes the rest of the cell to just like one edge of that whole piece. So you can see here's another picture of a big adipose cell, and then the nucleus kind of gets shoved to the outside here. And this is an example of where we would find the adipose tissue. There's always underneath our skin a little layer of adipose tissue, of fat, along with cushioning our organs. So that's our loose connective. We've got two types of loose connective. Areolar, which is just like the swaddle blankets and a lot of crazy matrix. And then we have adipose, which is the fat cells. So there's loose connective and there's dense connective. So if we look back here, let me, down here we've learned that the loose connective, the areolar, is mainly fibroblasts. Collagen fibers. And elastic fibers. Adipose is our fat tissue. All right, so we've learned loose connective. Now we're going to move on to dense connective. And then we'll pull this all together here. Yeah, to where I was just writing. Right here. You got it? Okay. All right, so then we can move on to dense connective. So the loose connective is that the fat tissue is considered loose connective because it's not very fibrous. It's not necessary because there isn't a lot of space between them either. It's not loose that way. It's just there isn't a lot of fibers. Here we've got the dense connective. Here we've got a lot of fibers and very little matrix. So a lot of fibers. Little matrix. All right. So a matrix, again, is going to be produced by the fibroblasts. And this time in our dense connective, we have lots of thick bundles of collagen fibers that run together like a whole bunch of shoelaces. Imagine taking one piece of yarn. One piece of yarn all by itself is really hard to break as it is. But let's say I was really strong and I could just rip apart a string of yarn. A bundle of collagen fibers is like taking a whole bunch of strands of yarn and running them parallel to each other in a big cord and then trying to pull them apart. Because they're all running in the same direction and they're made out of this strong collagen fiber and they create bundles, that gives them extra strength. So that's where we get the strength in our dense connective tissue. And that's our dense connective tissue are going to be like tendons, ligaments, and aponeurosis. So tendons and ligaments you guys are probably pretty familiar with. Tendons connects muscle to bone. So our Achilles tendon might be one of the more famous ones, the one that goes behind the back of our ankle. Very, very strong, thick cord back there. That is connecting the heel of the bone part of your heel up to the calf muscle, the gastrocnemius. So that's going to be like a tendon. A ligament connects bone to bone. So we've got the ligaments of the knee. Your ACL is your anterior cruciate ligament. That's connecting bone to bone. And then aponeurosis is connecting muscle to muscle. It's like a connective tissue that holds them all together. So these are the three types of dense, regular. And I'm throwing in a couple more categories again, dense regular and dense irregular, but really you guys it's pretty easy to remember because dense regular, they're all running in the same direction, where dense irregular, the fibers are not necessarily, they're kind of running in all kinds of directions. They're running in an irregular pattern, if that makes sense. So we've got our fibroblasts, very few of them, a lot of collagen fibers in bundles that run in the same direction. So here would be a picture. Here's you can kind of see how these are all running the same direction. And then if you look, there's little dark spots. Those dark spots are the nuclei of the fibroblasts. So you know that there are a few cells in there. You can tell there's not a lot. It's mainly collagen fibers, but there are some fibroblasts. So here would be kind of an idea of what it would look like, where you'd have some of the fibroblasts, and then these would be the collagen fibers. So that would be, any of these are going to look like that. Your tendons, your ligaments, or your aponeurosis are all going to look like this, all flowing in the same direction. You can kind of see the cell, the nuclei from the fibroblasts scattered throughout, and it's very strong. Then you have your dense irregular. So this is showing you kind of a comparison between the two. Here's our dense regular where the collagen fibers seem to run in one direction, right? Where here, dense irregular, they're still running in bundles or cords. You can still see some kind of cords running together. They just aren't all running in the same direction. Now you've got a cord of them running this way and a cord of them running a different direction. And it kind of creates all these like swirly patterns in here. You can see this is what it would look like under a slide. And you're going to find this right underneath the dermis. So we find, remember when we were talking about, well, no, we'll get to that. I'll talk to that at a different time. So the dermis, we've got different layers of skin. The dermis is right below the epidermis. So if we were to peel back our skin, the very first layer is going to be epithelial cells. Then underneath it, we're going to have the dermis. And that's going to be this irregular, dense connective. So here's another example, too, where you see the regular, meaning they're all running in the same direction. So regular, same direction. Oops. Irregular, different directions. All right, so here they're all running in this, generally, you know, except for a couple of hiccups here, generally all running in the same direction. Collagen fibers, and then you can see the cells again. Here's some fibroblasts. Here would be the irregular. This is the stuff that's in the dermis, right below the epidermis in our skin. And it's still fibrous. There's lots of cords of fibers here. They're just running in different directions now. Still has the fibroblasts, still has the collagen fibers, just all the difference between regular and irregular is the direction that they run. And then you've got reticular. And this is the last of the connective tissue that we're going to go through today. Reticular is just going to be they kind of have their own category. So instead of calling their fibroblasts, which really they're just fibroblasts, they just have their own name, reticular cells. Doing the same thing though, still making the matrix. This time though, the only fibers in the matrix are these reticular fibers. These are stronger. These are made more for structure. And they're going to be found in the lymph, spleen, thymus, and red bone marrow. These organs store or produce white blood cells. So you can see the reticular they show with really dark lines that stand out like they're in bold print. That's because these are really thick, not very bendy type of fibers. And you can see they still call it a fibroblast here. It would be a reticular cell. But just even that they wrote that in there shows you that they're essentially the same cell. It's a fibroblast. This text gives it a special name. So that's all of them. So just to show you that you know probably more than you think you do about these things, let's go through these quickly and tell me which type of cell that we're looking at. So first tell me if it's epithelial or connective, and then let's figure out specifically what type. Okay? So this first one, this is an opening. So these are like tubes that have kind of been squished. So it's epithelial, and then what type? Simple for sure. It's one row, and simple cuboidal. So we've got one row of these cells that look very plump. Simple cuboidal. All right, how about this one? Is that going to be epithelial or connective? It's going to be connective. Is it going to be loose connective or dense connective? Dense connective. Is it going to be regular or irregular? Regular. They're running the same direction. So it's dense, regular, connective tissue. All right? How about this one right here? Epithelial. Now, what type of epithelial cell are we looking at there? Columnar. Is it simple or stratified? Simple. Simple columnar. All right. How about here? Epithelial or connective? Epithelial. Is it going to what shape? Columnar. Pseudostratified. Oops. Most of the time, yeah. There's like one place in your body or two places and I think only one place in a female where you might find simple columnar. Or, I'm sorry, stratified columnar. But that was in the urethra of men. All right, is this one going to be epithelial or connective? Connective. Dense or loose? Loose. Nope. That one's dense. Is it regular or irregular? Irregular. How about this one? Epithelial or connective? Epithelial. What kind? Stratified. It's going to be stratified squamous. And I know that I chose this one specifically because I want to get this. I mean, we talked about it once. Once is not enough to talk about an exception, though, occasionally. When you look at stratified squamous, because they're first made down here, they look a little plumper, but they get less and less. They get fewer and or more and more squished at the closer you get to the top. And so I won't show you pictures of stratified cuboidal because once again, that's one that we don't. The stratified columnar and the stratified cuboidal, we don't have a lot of those cells. We don't need to spend a lot of time talking about some cells that we only find in a few different places when we could really learn about the cells that are used all the time every day in our bodies. So stratified squamous sometimes looks a little cuboidal at the bottom, but if it's many layers and it looks squished at the top, it's squamous. If it really were stratified cuboidal, these would still look big and plump at the top here. And they don't. They're squished. All right. How about this one? Connective or epithelial? Loose or dense? Loose. Areolar or adipose? Areolar. And epithelial or connective? Connective. Loose. Areolar or adipose? Adipose. All right. So you guys knew it better than you thought, right? Right.
You're going to put these online?
Yes.